Today, she stands staring at the ruins of what was once a $40 million empire. And I can tell you that sometimes the most shocking twists come from the people you least expect. Victoria's husband thought he knew exactly who he married, but her reaction to the faked death left everyone speechless, including the FBI agents who had been following the case for over 2 years. Victoria Matthews had always been what society pages called effortlessly elegant. At 36, she moved through Manhattan's elite circles with the grace of someone born to privilege, though her background was far more modest than most people. Realized her husband, Jonathan Matthews, was 51 and owned Matthews & Associates, one of Wall Street's most exclusive investment firms. Their penthouse on Fifth Avenue overlooked Central Park, and their weekend estate in the Hamptons regularly hosted senators, Fortune 500 CEOs, and European aristocrats. Jonathan was the kind of man who commanded attention the moment he entered a room. His silver hair was always perfectly styled. His handmade suits cut to emphasize his still athletic frame, and his smile could charm money from the most skeptical investors. He'd built his fortune through what he called aggressive but legal investment strategies, though those close to the business sometimes whispered about deals that seemed too good to be true. "Darling, you look absolutely radiant tonight," Jonathan said to Victoria as they prepared for the Metropolitan Opera's opening gala. Victoria adjusted her Cartier diamond necklace, the one Jonathan had given her for their 10th anniversary. "Thank you, Jonathan. Mrs. Vanderbilt mentioned she's excited to discuss the Children's Literacy Foundation with you tonight. Always thinking about charity work, aren't you?" Jonathan's tone carried that familiar edge Victoria had learned to recognize over their 12 years of marriage. "Sometimes I wonder if you care more about those underprivileged children than your own husband's success." Victoria met his eyes in their bedroom mirror, her expression carefully neutral. "Of course not, Jonathan. Your success makes everything else possible." But Victoria's charitable work wasn't just a wealthy wife's hobby. She'd been a social worker before marrying Jonathan, with a master's degree in child psychology from Columbia. Her work with the Children's Educational Foundation involved creating literacy programs for kids in underserved communities, and she'd personally helped establish reading centers in 15 different schools across the 5 boroughs. The truth was, Jonathan had grown increasingly paranoid about Victoria's independence over the past 3 years. Her phone calls seemed more secretive, her explanations for afternoon meetings more detailed. When she claimed to be at foundation board meetings, he'd started having her followed by Marcus Webb, a former NYPD detective who now specialized in discreet investigations for wealthy clients who wanted to keep their suspicions private. "She's exactly where she says she'll be, Mr. Matthews," Webb reported during their monthly meetings at an exclusive steakhouse in Midtown. Foundation meetings, school visits, literacy program evaluations. The teachers and administrators all praise her work. If she's hiding something, she's better at it than most criminals I've tracked. But Webb's reassurances only made Jonathan more suspicious. Their household staff moved through the penthouse like well-trained actors in an expensive play. Carmen, their housekeeper for 6 years, maintained the apartment's museum-quality perfection. While carefully observing the growing tension between her employers, David, their personal chef, had witnessed countless arguments through the kitchen's serving window during formal dinner parties. Rebecca, Victoria's personal assistant, managed everything from social calendars to charitable foundation business. Her loyalty to Victoria, absolute, despite Jonathan's occasional attempts to extract information about her employer's activities. Matthew's marriage had produced no children, a source of quiet disappointment that neither spouse discussed openly. Jonathan claimed his business demanded complete focus, while Victoria channeled her maternal instincts into her literacy work. Their social circle included couples like the Vanderbilts and the Astors, Manhattan's old money families who valued discretion and appearances above almost everything else. Rebecca had worked for Victoria for 4 years and understood her employer better than anyone. Mrs. Matthews receives a lot of calls from the foundation, she explained to Jonathan during one of his fishing expeditions for information. Dr. Martinez from Columbia calls frequently about the research component of the literacy programs. They're documenting the educational impact in a study that might influence federal funding. What Jonathan didn't know was that Dr. Elena Martinez wasn't just a Columbia professor. She was also a forensic psychologist who consulted with the FBI on cases involving financial crimes and their impact on communities. The literacy program research included documenting how investment fraud affected educational funding in the very communities Victoria was trying to help. The first major crack in Jonathan's facade appeared during a charity auction at the Plaza Hotel 8 months before his staged death. Victoria had organized the event to raise money for new reading programs, and the guest list included several prominent investors who had made substantial donations to the cause. Jonathan watched from across the ballroom as Victoria engaged in animated conversations with Dr. Martinez and several other academics, her eyes lighting up in ways he rarely witnessed during their private moments. Victoria seems incredibly knowledgeable about educational policy, commented Dr. Robert Sterling, a prominent child psychologist who served on the Foundation's board. She understands federal funding structures and statistical analysis better than most professors I know. You must be very proud of her academic achievements. Jonathan's champagne glass felt heavy in his hand as he absorbed this information. When had his wife acquired such detailed knowledge about government funding and statistical research? She's always been passionate about helping children, Jonathan replied carefully, his mind racing with new questions. Though I sometimes worry she takes on too much responsibility. Dr. Sterling's expression showed genuine admiration. The Foundation's impact has been extraordinary under her leadership. Just last month, her literacy program data helped secure a $2 million federal grant for urban schools. She's quite remarkable. That night, Jonathan confronted Victoria in their bedroom, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Exactly how much time are you spending on this foundation? Work, Victoria. Dr. Sterling made it sound like you're practically running a research university. Victoria continued applying her skincare routine, meeting his gaze in the vanity mirror. The foundation work is important to me, Jonathan. We're making real differences in children's lives. Making differences? How exactly? You're not an academic. You don't have a doctorate. What could you possibly be doing that requires such expertise? Jonathan's tone turned mocking, cruel, playing professor with your intellectual friends, pretending to be something you're not. Victoria's hand stilled on her night cream, her reflection showing the hurt his words inflicted. Help where I can, Jonathan. Research, program development, community outreach. Is that so threatening to you? The argument escalated into their worst fight in years, with Jonathan accusing Victoria of seeking validation outside their marriage while she defended her right to meaningful work. Their raised voices carried through the penthouse, overheard by Carmen, who was preparing the guest room for an upcoming visit from Jonathan's European business partners. A flashback to their early marriage revealed a completely different dynamic. 8 years earlier, Victoria had been vibrant and ambitious, excited about expanding her social work into policy research. I've been thinking about pursuing a doctorate in educational psychology. Jonathan, Columbia has a program that focuses on literacy development in underserved communities. I could make a real impact. Jonathan had seemed supportive then, or at least pretended to be. Whatever makes you happy, darling, though I hope you'll consider how that might affect our social obligations. But Victoria's academic plans were gradually discouraged through subtle manipulation and increasing social demands. Do you really need more education when you have so much influence already? Wouldn't your time be better spent supporting my business relationships? Jonathan's arguments always sounded reasonable, even loving, but they effectively redirected Victoria's intellectual energy toward supporting his career instead of developing her own. Webb's surveillance reports began revealing activities that fed Jonathan's growing paranoia. She's meeting with people you might find concerning, the investigator reported during a tense lunch meeting. Dr. Martinez, yes, but also Agent Patricia Chen from the FBI's white-collar crime division. They had coffee 3 times last week, always in different locations. FBI. Jonathan's blood pressure spiked as he processed this information. What the hell would my wife be doing with federal agents? Webb shuffled through his photographs and notes, clearly uncomfortable with the implications. Hard to say without getting closer. Could be related to the Foundation's federal grant applications. Could be something else entirely. Agent Chen specializes in financial crimes that affect educational institutions. The mention of FBI involvement in educational funding sent Jonathan's paranoia into overdrive. Agent Patricia Chen became the focus of obsessive research that revealed Her specialization in cases where investment fraud had damaged school districts and educational nonprofits, Jonathan discovered that Chen had been investigating several high-profile cases where wealthy individuals had used charitable foundations to launder money or hide assets from federal authorities. Marcus Webb's surveillance photos began showing Victoria in increasingly compromising situations. From Jonathan's paranoid perspective, lunch meetings with Agent Chen, private conversations with Dr. Martinez in Columbia's psychology building, and extended stays at foundation offices that sometimes lasted well into the evening. "There's something else," Webb reported during their next meeting, his voice hesitant. "Your wife has been accessing financial databases and federal grant reporting systems. I couldn't get close enough to see exactly what she was researching, but it required high-level security clearances that ordinary foundation directors don't typically have." Jonathan's behavior became increasingly erratic as his suspicions consumed every aspect of his life. He began showing up unexpectedly at Victoria's foundation events, his presence creating obvious tension among the board members and academic consultants who had grown comfortable working with Victoria independently. During one particularly uncomfortable incident at a literacy program launch in Harlem, Jonathan publicly questioned Victoria's qualifications to speak about educational policy. "My wife is being modest about her role," Jonathan announced to the gathered teachers, administrators, and community leaders, his voice carrying across the school auditorium. "She's not actually an educational expert, after all, just someone who cares deeply about children." The silence that followed was deafening, with Dr. Martinez and several Columbia professors exchanging uncomfortable glances while Victoria's face flushed with humiliation. "Jonathan's absolutely right," Victoria said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm simply grateful to contribute however I can to these amazing educators' work." But the damage was done. Several foundation board members approached Victoria privately afterward, expressing concern about her husband's behavior and assuring her of their continued support for her leadership. The confrontations at home became more frequent and vicious. Jonathan's accusations grew wilder and more specific, fueled by Webb's surveillance reports and his own twisted imagination. "You're working with federal agents against me, aren't you?" he raged during one particularly brutal argument in their kitchen. "All those meetings with FBI agents, all those late nights researching financial databases. Do you think I'm stupid, Victoria?" "There are no meetings with agents, Jonathan," Victoria replied, her voice exhausted from months of defending herself against increasingly paranoid accusations. "Agent Chen consulted with our foundation about grant compliance." That's all. Her explanation only fueled Jonathan's rage further. "Compliance with what? What aren't you telling me about this foundation work?" Victoria's sister Amanda visited from Boston during this turbulent period, witnessing firsthand the deterioration of the marriage, a federal prosecutor specializing in white-collar crime. Amanda had always harbored reservations about Jonathan, sensing something predatory beneath his charming facade. "Vic, you look like you haven't slept in weeks," she observed during a private moment in Victoria's home office. "This level of suspicion and control isn't normal. It's abusive. It's complicated." Amanda Victoria replied, organizing foundation files with unnecessary precision. "Jonathan's under enormous pressure with the European expansion. The merger with Richter Holdings has everyone working 18-hour days." But Amanda recognized the classic patterns of psychological abuse she'd encountered in countless criminal cases. A particularly devastating flashback revealed the moment Victoria's spirit nearly broke completely. 3 months before Jonathan's staged death, she had been invited to join Columbia's faculty as an adjunct professor in their educational psychology program, teaching graduate courses on literacy development policy. Dr. Martinez had worked behind the scenes to create this opportunity, understanding Victoria's unused potential and academic capabilities. "It's a tremendous opportunity, Mrs. Matthews," Dr. Martinez had explained during their private meeting in her Columbia office. "You'd be teaching future social workers and educational policy analysts. The position comes with full research privileges and the opportunity to publish your foundation's work in academic journals." Victoria's eyes had filled with tears of gratitude and excitement, the first genuine joy she'd felt in months of increasing marital tension. But when Victoria shared the news with Jonathan that evening, His reaction was explosive and cruel. "Absolutely not," he declared, his voice cold and final. "My wife doesn't need to work for a university salary. What will people think? That I can't provide for you? That you're so desperate for intellectual validation, you'll take charity from your professor friends?" The argument that followed was devastating, with Jonathan systematically attacking Victoria's intelligence, education, and worth as a person. "You have a master's degree from 12 years ago, Victoria. That doesn't make you qualified to teach graduate students. You'll embarrass yourself and me." The finality in his tone, the complete dismissal of her dreams and capabilities, marked a turning point in their relationship. Victoria agreed to decline the Columbia position, but something fundamental shifted inside her that night. The woman who had spent 12 years trying to be the perfect wife began documenting every cruel word, every controlling behavior, every attempt to diminish her independence and self-worth. Webb began providing daily reports, photographing Victoria's every movement, recording her conversations when possible, and even going through her personal belongings when she left the penthouse. Jonathan's study became a command center filled with surveillance photos, detailed timelines of Victoria's activities, and increasingly paranoid theories about her true loyalties. "She's definitely planning something," Jonathan confided to his business partner Harrison Richter during a private dinner at their exclusive club. "Women don't just change overnight without reason. She's become secretive, defiant, intellectual. Mark my words, Harrison, she's setting me up for divorce and trying to take half of everything I've built." Harrison, uncomfortable with his friends' obsessive behavior, tried to offer perspective. "Maybe she's just growing as a person. Victoria's always been intelligent. Perhaps you're misreading normal development." But Jonathan was beyond rational thinking. His paranoia had consumed his judgment completely, and he began formulating his ultimate test of Victoria's loyalty and true intentions. The idea of faking his own death grew from a seed of suspicion into an elaborate plan that would, he believed, reveal once and for all whether his wife truly loved him or was simply waiting for him to die so she could inherit his fortune and pursue her intellectual ambitions freely. The plan Jonathan devised was sophisticated and cruel in its precision. He spent 2 months arranging every detail involving Webb and a corrupt funeral director named Vincent Torres, who specialized in helping wealthy clients disappear when convenient. The staged boating accident was meticulously choreographed, complete with a destroyed yacht, falsified Coast Guard reports, and a memorial service to avoid the need for an actual body. Jonathan's death occurred on a stormy Saturday morning in early November during what was supposed to be a solo sailing trip to Martha's Vineyard, according to the fabricated Coast Guard report. The weather conditions made recovery impossible, requiring DNA analysis of recovered debris for official confirmation. The call came to Victoria at 6:30 a.m. from a Coast Guard commander trained in delivering devastating news to families. "Mrs. Matthews, I'm very sorry to inform you that your husband's vessel has been involved in a fatal accident." Victoria's scream of anguish was genuine, witnessed by Carmen, who rushed to help as Victoria collapsed onto their marble foyer floor, sobbing uncontrollably. What followed was a masterclass in grief that even Jonathan found convincing as he watched from hidden cameras throughout their penthouse and foundation offices. Victoria moved through the memorial arrangements like a woman, shattered by loss, her usually perfect appearance disheveled, her eyes constantly red from crying. She refused sedatives offered by their family physician. Jonathan's memory, the memorial service at St. Patrick's Cathedral, was attended by Manhattan's most powerful people, a gathering of investment bankers, politicians, socialites, and business leaders who had profited from their association with Jonathan Matthews. Executives to tears. "Jonathan was a complex man," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Brilliant and driven, sometimes demanding, but always passionate about excellence. He taught me that success requires sacrifice, that achievement demands total commitment. His greatest legacy isn't the wealth he accumulated, but the example he set of never accepting limitations." From his carefully chosen observation post in a rented apartment overlooking the cathedral, Jonathan recorded every moment of the service. He expected to catch Victoria struggling to maintain appropriate grief, perhaps showing relief at his death. Instead, he witnessed something that genuinely surprised him. Victoria's grief appeared completely authentic, her tears real, her body language that of a woman devastated by unexpected loss. But it was what happened after the other mourners departed that truly shook Jonathan to his core. Victoria remained in the empty cathedral for over 2 hours, kneeling before the altar in silent prayer, her shoulders shaking with what appeared to be overwhelming grief. When she finally rose to leave, she approached the memorial photo of Jonathan and whispered something inaudible to his recording equipment. That evening, Victoria's behavior became even more puzzling. Instead of meeting with lawyers about inheritance issues or celebrating her newfound freedom, from his hidden cameras, Jonathan watched his wife examining financial documents, legal contracts, and investment records with an intensity that suggested she was looking for something specific. "I know you're watching me, Jonathan," Victoria said suddenly, speaking directly to the hidden camera behind his desk. "Never believed I could be loyal to someone who treated me like a possession instead of a partner." Jonathan's blood turned to ice as he processed her words from his secret apartment. How could she possibly know about the surveillance? How had she discovered the hidden cameras? But Victoria continued, her voice growing stronger and more confident with each revelation. "I know about the fake death too, darling. Vincent Torres isn't nearly as discreet as you think. His assistant Maria has been documenting your little scheme for weeks. You see, Jonathan Agent Chen isn't just interested in our foundation's grant compliance. She's been building a case against Matthews and Associates for securities fraud, money laundering, and racketeering." The world tilted beneath Jonathan's feet as Victoria's words sank in. She knew about the federal investigation, but how much did she know about his business activities? And what was she planning to do with that knowledge? "I could have you arrested right now for fraud and conspiracy, but I have something much better planned. Enough for real intellectual work. Let's see how smart you really are. Tell us in the comments below." But then something incredible happened that would turn Jonathan's world completely upside down. The revelation of Victoria's true knowledge and capabilities began months before Jonathan's staged death, traced back to what appeared to be innocent foundation work, but was actually a sophisticated federal investigation into one of Manhattan's largest financial crime syndicates. Victoria hadn't just been volunteering with educational nonprofits. She'd been working as an undercover consultant for the FBI's white-collar crime division. "Your husband has been under federal investigation for 3 years." Victoria, Agent Patricia Chen, had explained during their first real conversation about Jonathan's criminal activities. Matthews and Associates is a front for money laundering, operations that have processed over $200 million in illegal funds. "We approached you because of your social work background and your access to Jonathan's personal and business activities." Victoria's initial reaction had been complete denial and protective anger toward the man she'd married. "That's impossible. Jonathan is successful and aggressive, yes, but he's not a criminal. You must have him confused with someone else." But as Chen presented evidence gathered by federal investigators over years of surveillance, Victoria was forced to confront the devastating reality that her husband's fortune had been built on sophisticated criminal enterprises. A detailed flashback revealed Victoria's gradual education about Jonathan's true nature and the scope of his crimes. Agent Chen had introduced her to FBI forensic accountants who showed her how Matthews and Associates had been systematically defrauding pension funds, retirement accounts, and educational endowments of hundreds of millions of dollars. "Mrs. Matthews, we understand this is overwhelming," Agent Chen had said during their clandestine meeting in a coffee shop far from Manhattan's financial district. "But your husband's crimes have damaged the very communities your foundation serves. 3 school districts have lost their entire pension funds to his Ponzi schemes." The transformation of Victoria from naive wife to federal cooperator wasn't immediate or easy. It required months of soul-searching, confronting the reality that her luxurious lifestyle had been funded by criminal activity that had destroyed thousands of families, life savings, and retirement security. The children's literacy programs she'd been funding had actually been damaged by Jonathan's crimes against educational institutions. "I won't testify against him in open court," Victoria had finally told Agent Chen after agreeing to cooperate with the investigation. "But I'll document everything, photograph files, record conversations, and provide access to his private business records. I want complete immunity for any unknowing participation, and I want protection when this is over." The negotiation had been complex, involving multiple federal agencies and months of legal preparation. Victoria's cooperation agreement included provisions for witness protection, asset forfeiture exemptions, and most importantly, the opportunity to help recover stolen funds for Jonathan's victims. Victoria's increased involvement with the foundation served a perfect cover for her meetings with federal agents, forensic accountants, and criminal prosecutors. The late nights and secretive phone calls that had triggered Jonathan's paranoia were actually strategy sessions with federal investigators, who were building the largest white-collar crime case in Manhattan's history. The relationship between Victoria and the federal team evolved from professional cooperation to genuine commitment to justice. "I never expected to find purpose in destroying my own marriage," Victoria confided to Agent Chen during one of their weekly briefings, "but seeing the impact of Jonathan's crimes on real families and the children I work with, I can't be complicit anymore." Dr. Martinez's role was more complex than Jonathan had realized. As a forensic psychologist consulting with the FBI, she had been documenting the psychological impact of financial crimes on communities, while also helping Victoria process the emotional trauma of discovering her husband's true nature. The discovery of Jonathan's plan to fake his death had actually accelerated the federal timeline. Vincent Torres had been under FBI surveillance for months due to his involvement in helping wealthy criminals disappear to avoid prosecution. When Torres began making preparations for Jonathan's elaborate death scheme, federal agents immediately recognized an opportunity to add multiple fraud charges to their existing case. "This is perfect," Agent Chen had explained to Victoria during an emergency meeting. "If he goes through with faking his death, we can charge him with conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice on top of the existing financial crimes. More importantly, we can seize all his assets immediately under death benefit fraud statutes." Victoria's decision to allow Jonathan to proceed with his plan rather than expose it immediately demonstrated strategic thinking that impressed even seasoned federal prosecutors. "He needs to commit fully to the fraud before we move," she had told the assembled federal team. "Half measures won't be enough for the level of justice his victims deserve." The preparation phase of Victoria's counterattack was a masterpiece of federal law, enforcement, coordination, and psychological strategy. While Jonathan believed he was orchestrating the ultimate test of his wife's loyalty, Victoria was actually documenting every aspect of his fraudulent scheme for prosecutors, who were preparing the most comprehensive financial crimes case in New York's legal history. Agent Chen had assembled a task force that included IRS investigators, SEC enforcement specialists, and international law enforcement agencies who had been tracking Jonathan's money laundering network. Across multiple countries, "Your husband isn't just stealing from American investors," Chen explained to Victoria during one of their comprehensive briefings. "He's been processing funds for international organized crime, corrupt foreign officials, and terrorist financing networks." Victoria's role in the investigation required her to become an expert in sophisticated surveillance techniques, document analysis, and criminal evidence collection. FBI technical specialists taught her how to use hidden cameras, recording devices, and computer monitoring software to document Jonathan's criminal activities without detection. The federal preparation included detailed psychological profiling of Jonathan's personality and predicted responses to various investigative scenarios. "He's a classic narcissistic psychopath with paranoid tendencies," explained Dr. Amanda Foster, the FBI's consulting psychologist. "His need for control and validation will drive him to make increasingly reckless decisions when his world starts collapsing. We need to be prepared for him to become violent." Victoria's personal safety had become a primary concern as the investigation intensified and Jonathan's paranoia increased. Federal agents installed panic buttons throughout the penthouse, established safe house protocols, and maintained 24-hour surveillance to protect her from potential retaliation. "If Jonathan discovers what you're doing before we're ready to execute arrests, your life will be in immediate danger," Agent Chen warned repeatedly. The financial preparation was extraordinarily complex, involving coordination with banking regulators, international law enforcement, and asset recovery specialists. Victoria worked with federal prosecutors to ensure that Jonathan's victims would receive maximum compensation from recovered assets while also protecting her own legal status from any potential criminal liability. "I don't want any money that came from his crimes," Victoria had insisted during negotiations with federal attorneys. but I need enough clean assets to rebuild my life and continue supporting the educational programs his crimes damaged. The legal team had worked for months to trace clean assets that could be preserved for Victoria's future while ensuring maximum recovery for crime victims. Training for Victoria's undercover role involved intensive preparation with federal agents, who taught her advanced surveillance detection, evidence preservation, and most critically, how to maintain her cover while living with a man who is becoming increasingly dangerous and unpredictable. The coordination between multiple federal agencies required perfect timing and flawless communication. IRS agents prepared to simultaneously raid Matthews and Associates offices in New York, Miami, London, and the Cayman Islands. SEC investigators stood ready to freeze all trading accounts and investment portfolios. International authorities in Switzerland, Luxembourg, and offshore banking havens had agreed to cooperate in seizing hidden assets. Victoria's psychological preparation included working with Dr. Martinez and other trauma specialists who helped her process the emotional complexity of betraying someone she had once loved while also serving justice for his victims. "You're about to watch your entire life explode and rebuild simultaneously," Dr. Martinez had explained. "The psychological impact will be severe regardless of how justified your actions are." The most challenging aspect of Victoria's preparation was maintaining her marriage facade while documenting Jonathan's increasing paranoia and controlling behavior. Every conversation was potentially evidence, every interaction analyzed for signs that he suspected her true activities. Victoria had to perfect the performance of being a submissive, controlled wife while actually orchestrating her husband's complete destruction. As Jonathan's staged death approached, Victoria's preparation entered its final phase. Federal agents had prepared comprehensive arrest warrants, asset seizure orders, and international cooperation agreements. Safe houses were arranged, new identity documents prepared if necessary, and witness protection protocols established in case Jonathan's criminal associates sought revenge. The federal case against Matthews and Associates had grown to include RICO, charges that could result in life imprisonment with evidence of criminal conspiracy involving international money laundering, securities fraud, and terrorism financing that made Jonathan one of the most wanted white-collar criminals in federal history. The execution of Victoria's revenge began the moment Jonathan's memorial service ended and she remained alone in the cathedral, speaking directly to the hidden cameras she knew were recording her every word. Her monologue was an emotional breakdown. It was a carefully scripted trigger for federal raids that were already in motion across 3 continents. Jonathan, Victoria continued, her voice carrying clearly to the recording equipment she knew he was monitoring. "Unit 1 to B, isn't it?" From his secret apartment, Jonathan's world began collapsing as his phone exploded with emergency calls from his office, his lawyers, his offshore account managers, all reporting simultaneous raids by federal agents who were seizing every document, computer, and financial record associated with Matthews and Associates and its shell companies. Victoria walked directly toward the hidden camera behind the cathedral altar. "You can stop hiding now. Darling, the game is over, and you've lost more completely than you ever imagined possible." The first phase of Victoria's revenge was financial annihilation, even as she spoke in the empty cathedral. Federal agents were executing search warrants at 23 different locations, countries to hide criminal proceeds. "Your Cayman Islands accounts were frozen 4 hours ago," Victoria informed the camera, her voice steady and confident. The Swiss banks followed suit 2 hours later. "Every offshore account, every hidden investment, every penny you thought you'd protected, it's all gone, Jonathan." As she stood in the cathedral, news of Jonathan's staged death and the federal investigation was breaking on financial networks worldwide. The carefully constructed image of Jonathan Matthews as a respected businessman was being systematically destroyed by FBI press releases detailing decades of sophisticated criminal activity. Jonathan's desperate phone calls to his powerful friends in business, associates were all being recorded by federal wiretaps that had been in place for months. His attempts to maintain his fake death story while also trying to coordinate legal defense created additional evidence of obstruction of justice and conspiracy charges, said, pulling out her phone to show breaking news alerts to the hidden camera. "The Vanderbilts, the Astors, everyone who attended your memorial service this morning." They're learning that the man they respected was actually a money launderer who stole their retirement funds to finance international organized crime. The arrival of federal agents at Jonathan's secret apartment marked the third phase of Victoria's revenge: personal accountability. Agent Chen led a team of armed marshals who had been positioned around the building for hours, waiting for Victoria's signal to move in for the arrest. Jonathan Matthews, you're under arrest for securities fraud, money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The additional charges related to his staged death added decades to his potential prison sentence. The fourth phase of Victoria's revenge was public vindication. As news of Jonathan's arrest spread through Manhattan's elite circles, Victoria received hundreds of calls and messages from friends, colleagues, and foundation board members expressing shock, support, and admiration for her courage in cooperating with federal investigators. Dr. Martinez appeared at the cathedral as Jonathan was being arrested, having been cleared by the FBI to provide emotional support during Victoria's moment of victory and trauma. "It's over, Victoria," she said gently, embracing her friend and client. "He can never hurt you or anyone else again." Victoria's transformation from victim to hero was complete as she watched federal agents load Jonathan into a convoy of vehicles, surrounded by news crews and photographers, she told Dr. Martinez as they walked out of the cathedral together. "He never understood that his cruelty was actually making me stronger." The fifth phase of Victoria's revenge was constructive justice, with Jonathan's criminal assets being liquidated to compensate his victims. Educational opportunities for the communities Jonathan had damaged. The federal case against Jonathan resulted in convictions on 47 separate charges, including RICO violations that carried mandatory life sentences. The international scope of his crimes led to additional prosecutions in 6 countries, with total asset recovery exceeding $400 million for victim compensation. 6 months after Jonathan's arrest, Victoria stood in a new literacy center in Harlem, watching children whose schools had been funded by recovered assets from her ex-husband's criminal empire. The little girl reading aloud to her classmates had no idea that her spirit. Jonathan Matthews was ultimately sentenced to life in federal prison without possibility of parole, housed in a maximum security facility in Colorado, where his fellow inmates showed no respect for wealthy criminals who had stolen from working families and pensioners. His daily reality of concrete walls and prison uniforms was a far cry from the penthouse and handmade suits he had used to project power and success. Victoria's new life as Dr. Victoria Martinez began exactly 2 years after Jonathan's arrest, when she completed her doctorate in educational psychology at Columbia and married Dr. Elena Martinez in a ceremony attended by FBI agents, federal prosecutors, and dozens of children whose lives had been improved by her foundation's work. The little girl who had been reading in the Harlem Literacy Center served as Flower Girl, beautiful from the ashes of someone else's cruelty. And that's how justice was served to a man who thought his wealth and paranoia made him untouchable. Jonathan Matthews spent 12 years underestimating the woman he tried to control, never realizing that Victoria's intelligence, compassion, and moral strength would become the very weapons that destroyed his criminal empire and gave hundreds of victims the justice they deserved. Children receive quality education, funding, and literacy support. Victoria works there full-time as executive director. Using her hard-earned wisdom and federal law enforcement, Victoria's journey from controlled wife to federal cooperator proves that even the most sophisticated criminals can be brought down by the people they think they own. Binge watch more incredible revenge stories in our Sweet Justice playlist. You'll discover dozens of amazing tales where karma catches up with bullies, criminals, and manipulators who thought they were too smart to face consequences. Share this story with someone who believes that good people can win, even against overwhelming odds. Victoria's courage in risking everything to serve justice shows us that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting criminals destroy themselves while you help their victims heal. Don't miss our next shocking story. It's even more unbelievable than this one. A tech billionaire who tried to frame his business partner for embezzlement had no idea his partner's wife was a former NSA cybersecurity specialist. The digital evidence she uncovered will leave you speechless about how technology can serve justice in ways criminals never expect. What would you have done in Victoria's situation? Would you have exposed Jonathan immediately when you discovered his crimes? Or would you have played the long game like she did to maximize justice for his victims? Sometimes patience and strategy serve justice better than immediate revenge. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was living a completely different life than you thought? Share your story in the comments. You might inspire our next video about how people's true characters eventually reveal themselves. No matter how well they think they're hiding, remember to hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest stories of justice, redemption, and karma in action. Until next time, keep believing that truth always wins in the end, even when it takes years to emerge from the shadows. Sometimes the most shocking twists come from the people who seem the most powerless. But as Victoria Matthews proved, underestimating someone's intelligence and moral courage is the biggest mistake a criminal can make. What did you think of the story? Leave a comment and a review about this story. Now, 2 buttons will appear. One to subscribe if you haven't already, and the other to watch other interesting stories. Choose one. Thank you for watching this far. See you soon.